So, yeah, sorry, you've got stuck with me again before the coffee break. I'll try to go quickly, so I'm not in the way of your coffee. So I wanted to give you a little bit of presentation about how Nominet have expanded our authoritative DNS infrastructure into the cloud. There's the agenda. We'll skip over that. I'm sure most people in the room know who Nominet are. A conversation I had with somebody at lunchtime led me to realise that some people don't necessarily know that we also run, as well as running .uk, we run more than 70 now GTLDs on behalf of other people, on behalf of other organisations. So we're the registry service provider for a lot of GTLDs. I'm Brett Carr. I manage the DNS team. I'm not going to read out all those names. There's a lot of other people involved in actually doing this work. I managed it, not did it, but I do understand it. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to try and answer them. So again, a little bit of a history of what Nominet's DNS infrastructure has looked like in the past. Up until 2000, I've been working for Nominet for 10 years. So I predate all this. Up to 2015, infrastructure was there when I started. We originally had 7 Unicast DNS servers in various locations, mainly in the UK, 1 in Europe. There was no Anycast in our own infrastructure. We did engage with a external service provider that did Anycast for us, but these were just standard physical servers in 7 different locations, taking IP space from a service provider and using that to provide Unicast DNS. In 2015, we designed and deployed our own Anycast infrastructure with 4 sites in the UK, 2 sites in Europe and 2 sites in the US. So we announced 4 name servers for each of our TLDs from those 8 sites. This is all on-premise virtualization infrastructure, so it's some physical servers running virtualization software and VMs split out for the different TLDs, and then some Juniper router equipment that announces our Anycast prefixes. That's worked very well for us. I think that our expansion into GTLDs meant that we were getting more demand for a more geographically dispersed infrastructure, so filling in more locations basically. And so last year we decided that we wanted to expand this a little bit into more locations. Now obviously we could have done the obvious thing, and that's just built. You know, we've got 8 sites that all look the same. Build another 2 or build another 4 that look the same. But building more of those physical nodes is expensive, and so we wanted to consider other options. Obviously, and using other people's computers, i.e. the cloud, is cheaper. So we kind of looked at the obvious choices at this point, which was AWS, Azure, Google, and other people that might provide some kind of cloud-ish infrastructure. Because we already had some experience in running some stuff in AWS, we selected that as the most potentially suitable and started to do some investigation into what the possibilities were. So some of the issues we ran into straight away was that using your own IP space, because we wanted to use our own IP space so we could Anycast the existing prefixes we were already using. Support for that in AWS it's not really supported unless you do something like Amazon Direct Connect, where you announce the prefixes from your own data center and the whole of traffic into AWS through the Direct Connect. And actually that was one of the options we did explore for a little while. We also discovered that the Amazon Elastic Load Balancers don't support UDP, they only support TCP. And so when we were coming across these issues, we started to search for partner organisations who might be able to help us with this kind of stuff. And as part of the looking at the Amazon Direct Connect option, we found an organisation called netatcuate. They're based in the US, and they've got a lot of, what we discovered when we engaged with them, and we had a few initial conference calls, is they've got a lot of knowledgeable people around Anycast and BGP, and so they impressed us with the way they talked to us, and they understood what our requirements were. They'd done similar deployments for other organisations, and they understood what our needs were. And so we initially started engaging with them to do Amazon Direct Connect into their data centers and announce our prefixes and route our traffic into AWS. However, when we started talking to them, it became obvious quite quickly that although everybody thinks that Amazon have got a lot of infrastructure in a lot of locations, they actually not got that many locations when you look at it. And actually netatcuate had infrastructure in 25 plus locations globally, which is more than AWS. And some areas of the world that we wanted to put servers, and netatcuate had them and AWS didn't. As I said, they had solid experience with other DNS providers, and they provided references that we talked to, and we got good feedback. All of their systems have got API access into them, so we could programmatically do things in a similar way we could with AWS. And evaluation of their pricing proved it was as good as AWS at least, and they had some built-in DDoS protection. So we initially deployed 4 locations. We deployed VMs in 4 locations, Dallas, Sao Paulo, Hong Kong and Sydney, to fill in some of the areas where we'd had feedback that we needed to get more, try and get the latency down to end users. We deployed 1 VM in each of these locations that serves all of our TLD zones, both UK and Dow GTLDs. Servers have 8 CPUs and 32 gig of memory. We use ExaBGP as a BGP daemon on these boxes, so we peer with netatcuate, we announce our prefixes for our TLD DNS servers to netatcuate, and they announce onwards to the internet for us. We custom wrote a health checker that basically checks that the DNS server is answering for the zones it should be, and everything's healthy. And if it isn't, it automatically withdraws the prefixes, and obviously with it being Anycast, the DNS queries then go elsewhere. For software stack on the boxes, we use a combination of DNS dist and NSD. So NSD is obviously the software that mainly loads and answers the DNS queries. DNS dist, for those people who may not have come across it, it's basically a DNS-based load balancer. And obviously, with this being a single VM, we don't really need a load balancer. The reason DNS dist is there is it provides a really good and easy-to-use interface to be able to do DNS-based filtering. So if we were under some kind of DNS-based DDoS, and we could identify what the some kind of pattern in the DNS queries, we could use the filtering capabilities in DNS dist to drop some of that traffic. And then lastly, some of you are aware we've got a DNS analytics platform called Turing. So each one of these boxes also has a collector for Turing that collects all the DNS queries and hauls them back into a data warehouse back in our main data centers. So probably a lot of you have heard of a concept known as immutable infrastructure. We operate all of this infrastructure based on that principle. So all of these VMs are built from a single image. And then we use Ansible rules and playbooks to configure them. So we only maintain the image. If we need to do any changes to any of the servers, we make those changes to the image and all the playbooks, and then roll out and then destroy and roll out all the servers from scratch again in an automated fashion. This also applies to things like operating system patching. So when we're ready to patch the operating systems, we patch the image. We roll the image out onto a beta server, test it. If that works, then we destroy and roll out all the production sites. In other words, each server is born. We use it, we kill it, and then it's reborn. The next couple of slides are just demonstrating some of the DDoS capability that netatcuate can do perform. So for a very minimal fee, they provide automatic DDoS protection. So they've got the word AI in there, which I hate, but their platform examines all the traffic and it learns the normal traffic patterns, and then should they detect something out of the ordinary or something that's not DNS, for instance, There's a known DDoS traffic pattern, and that's automatically rerouted through their DDoS mitigation platform and filtered appropriately. So during this deployment, we did have a few small issues. Initially, we saw less traffic than expected, so we needed to make some tweaks in our routing policy. We needed the netatcuate to make some routing policy changes. We needed to make some tweaks in our BGP config, and we did a bit of up and down tweaking. We ended up with a lot of traffic on the cloud nodes at one point, probably as much traffic as we got on the big nodes, and actually that's not desirable. What we wanted to do is make them answer local traffic, but not pull in traffic from remote parts of the world. When we did testing of these platforms, we can see that our global sites can do over 500,000 queries per second, and the cloud sites can do more like 100,000 queries per second. So we need to be mindful of this in a DDoS situation where we need to be careful that we route traffic into the platforms that are able to cope with that traffic and not overload some of the cloud platforms that can take less traffic. And one of the things that we found during this implementation was that TCP offload needs disabling in the VMs, otherwise your performance gets hit quite badly. From a future perspective, so we currently still only have those 4 sites, but we will roll out to more. I'm not sure when and where yet, but that's certainly on the roadmap. And some of you may be aware that Nominet also runs some recursive DNS platforms, both for the UK public sector, but also for enterprises, where we're planning on, well, in fact, we're already using some infrastructure within netatcuate for those recursive platforms as well. 2 things to mention before I move on to any questions you may have. One is that a lot of this was based on an idea from Nat Morris, which I'd also like to acknowledge. Nat Morris did a presentation a while ago on running an Anycast DNS on a shoestring service, and a lot of the ideas I had when we brought this in were based on that presentation, so that was really useful. And the last thing to mention is that if anybody wants to talk to somebody from netatcuate, there is somebody here, and I can introduce you during the coffee break if you want. Thank you. Any questions?
Marek from Felix here. Thank you for a really interesting presentation. The one question I have is, we've been talking earlier about DNS and things moving to DNS provider silos. To me, it feels putting things in the cloud is somebody else's silo again. Or are you going to, in future, when you expand, look at, for example, another cloud provider in addition to netatcuate?
We may do that. I think that it's certainly not our intention to get rid of our normal physical infrastructure and move it all to the cloud. This is a combination of efforts, basically. So we want to protect ourselves by having multiple. I mean, what I didn't mention in the presentation is as well as running our own Anycast, we also outsource some Anycast to another provider as well. So at the moment, we've got three arrows to our bow. We've got our own physical infrastructure, our outsourcing to Ultra DNS, and our netatcuate. And that's the way I see things going, is a multifaceted approach rather than a single approach.
That's very good to hear. Thank you.
For Brett? Okay, thank you, Brett.